Good evening and welcome to All Things Esoteric Podcast, Episode 21, The Kabbalah, Part 2. Good evening, Anthony.
Hey.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Okay, we're going to go right into the night sky tonight. Just going to bring a few things up that I thought were important. And then we'll go into part 2 where we take a closer look now, having kind of the background in place of the actual tree and its positions, the Zephyrahs, the 10. Is that how you would say that, Zephyrah?
I mean, the pronunciation I know is Sephirah, but I mean, it's probably not the Hebrew pronunciation.
But yeah, we'll take a look at those and the corresponding tarot cards and the numerology messages too behind those numbers. So, okay, so let's go forward. I just want to tell you, it's pretty encouraging what we've got going on despite all of the craziness. Because one thing, whether we like it or not, we are seeing massive change within our country's economic systems. And a lot of it, we don't have time to sit and watch world financial news for every single country or major country. The BRIC nations, for instance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and what they're doing over there, getting off of getting off of the dollar standard, completely trading in gold, setting it up, doing it, have been doing it, elaborating on it, moving it out. It's a thing. And so that's going on in the financial news. But I want to bring in more closer this, the changes we're going to see with the solar eclipse that we're going to be having in April 21st, Eastern Standard Time at 12 a.m. So all planets are in forward movement with the exception of Mercury, which is going to turn retrograde on April 21st. And this is actually just hours after this Aries solar eclipse I'm going to get into in a moment. So it's quite interesting, the time frame on Mercury choosing to go retrograde. It's going to stay there until May 15th. So I'm not going to go into what that means, but I think most people understand if they've been listening to us. Mercury is that conscious, intellectual, intelligent, communicative energy. It's androgynous, wants to move out and connect with others. And when it goes in retrograde, it's having to revisit lessons, which is important because it's going to be going through this North Node in Taurus, a second pass through before it goes forward again. And I'm going to bring in the financial system tied into the North Node in Taurus in a minute too, and why that's important. But that's going to be occurring. We also have the nodes, which are in retrograde and are going to be changing and going into Aries here the latter part of the year. So this is important to take a peek at. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And then Mars has moved into Cancer. It did that in March. It ingressed on the 25th, and it will leave May 20th. So towards the end of May, we have some things shifting again as we're getting used to the new shifting energies, while some of that energy is going retrograde. So that's not easy energy to navigate, especially when it's the inner planets of Mercury or Venus or Mars, where these are the moon, these are planets that go around very quickly and we sense them and feel them more on a daily way instead of the longer transits of the outer planets. So Saturn has moved into Pisces. We talked about that last podcast, but it's sitting at 3 degrees tonight quite comfortably. Now moved into the sign and is going to be there until May 25th, 2025. So a lot of people that were born with Saturn and Pisces here 29 and a half years ago Or some of you, like me, might have just had your Saturn return. I had mine at 59 and a half, and a lot of people 30 years ago are having their first return. This is really important because when Saturn returns, goes into a new sign and it returns in the sign like Pisces. Pisces is that 12th house outside of itself energy, and that it's seeking to rectify the life and to bring it to a close and have meaning with that which is above to that which is below. And it's wanting the highest of the high. And Neptune has been in Pisces, its ruling lord, for quite some time. So this is a time where I opened up where incredible potential and opportunity for those having their Saturn return in Pisces, and also just for the world in general, to take a sustained look. Not only was Neptune home in its sign, but now Saturn, the planet of restriction and discipline and boundaries, the father, Cronus, time, 10th house, rules Capricorn, is saying we need to take a more serious look at these Piscean themes. And we need to bring them down in a way that they actually are understood by the masses. That's the way I would see Saturn and Pisces, because Saturn is a very practical sign, and it wants to do things at the end of the day. It wants to create that structure and discipline for a reason. It wants to produce. It's earth, tied to earth energy. So I think that that's really important to bring out Pisces. I misspoke and stated that Saturn was a sign. Saturn is a planet, obviously. Sorry about that. Pluto moved into Aquarius. We know this last month, March 25th, and is going to sit there until it moves retrograde, and it will go back into Capricorn for a little while, and then January it will go forward into Aquarius. So I think it's important to talk about this here. And this is the North Node. I want to bring it in light of Pluto. And we could be looking around and saying, what is going on with our currency? And I know that we don't want to make this podcast about the currency. Why are we seeing the financial system the way we are, so crazy with inflation? You've been listening to us. I've been talking about it. But with Pluto now having had its USA return in Pluto, it came all the way around to when the Declaration of Independence was signed that day. Pluto is sitting in the second house of the United States chart, which is ruled by Taurus, which has to do with our resources and money. Whenever we see Taurus, we have to see its rulership of Venus. Venus rules Taurus and rules Libra, but it rules Libra in a different way than it rules Taurus. When it rules Taurus, it has to do more with our personal things. It's the second house of the zodiac, so you've been born in the first, popped into the world in the eastern sky, and now, what is your relationship to things on earth and money? Are you secure? Are you safe? Do you have a roof over your head? Do you have money in the bank? Do you have savings? Do you have good food? Do you have luxury? Can you afford luxury? Are you barely making it, or do you have bounty within you? And so these are the themes of the United States of America chart with Pluto there, having Pluto being the soul evolver planet, the lessons we learn, the longer themes, the things that we carry with us our whole life that we're evolving, we should be, and growing into. That's Pluto. Things that need to die, the things that need to be born. So with Pluto in the second house, we know that the United States of America has a lot to do with money, and it has a lot to do with its evolution with money. And that the United States of America that day was playing a part regarding Venus and regarding money, and we are the world's trade currency, the US dollar. But that is shifting and changing, as it would if Pluto returned and said, okay, you've had your 248 years, America. But now we're going into Aquarius. We're shifting the costume, and we're changing the way that we are expressing ourselves. And so there's a lot more that could be said about that. But the North Node, which is what I want to read next and then tie it back to that Pluto, has been in Taurus. Now, there's a book that I found by Donna von Towen. It's called The Astrologer's Notebook. And I found it sitting all by itself in this out-of-the-way bookshelf on like the third steps up back in a corner, and it was just amazing the way I found it. I happened to be studying, I kid you not, the nodes at that time. So this book, I feel, found me. But I love the way that this writer explains the nodes, because the nodes are tricky. They're not a planet. They're not an asteroid. They're not a star. They're an astrological imaginary point. I'm going to quote him now and read. It says, the moon's nodes are imaginary points that mark off a sort of celestial equator. They're used by astronomers in the calculation of astronomical distances, eclipses, and other important data. Since the moon's nodes aren't planets, it may seem hard to believe that they have any place in the horoscope, but they have as much place as the part of fortune or the ascendant, neither of which are planets. Like these points, the nodes are measures of the relationship between time and space. In other words, they show where you're at as of your birth time. Although I've read nothing about how the nodes came to be used by astrologers, it seems likely that they were used in calculating the timing of eclipses, since the eclipse has traditionally been thought to herald momentous change on both mundane and personal levels. So stopping for a moment, I want to bring this in. We're having a Aries solar eclipse April 20th, Eastern Standard Time. The nodes already mark out when eclipses are. They're greatly tied to them. And so it's important to understand that this eclipse bears more weight. And we also just had Pluto's return in the United States chart, and Taurus is in the North Node, and Taurus rules Venus, already said. So we've got Taurus in the North Node, Venus-related themes, and then we've got Pluto in the second house of Taurus, Venus-related themes. So there's this tie here to our country when the nodes are in Taurus, or in Scorpio, for that matter, because we always want to look at the polarity sign of the sign that a planet or a position is in, because we have duality, and if we don't do that, we'll become really unbalanced in our understanding of that sign. So the nodes are also referred to in Vedic astrology as Rahu and Ketu, the dragon's head, Rahu, and the dragon's tail. Fascinating to study that in the Vedic understanding of Rahu. KRS channel did an incredible movie called Rahu. He made it himself. He's fabulous. He's a Vedic astrologer, and he also did Ketu now, and I just watched them both, and they're just from that whole viewpoint of India and the Indian tradition and the way that he studied under his guru and was taught and trained. It's just really, really well done. It's fabulous. The symbols are a horseshoe going with the top and then the nodes pointing down, the two ends pointing down. That would be a horseshoe going up. That's the North Node. And then when it's turned around like a horseshoe looks, that's the South Node. So wherever that is in your chart, that's what it looks like. The nodes move backward in around the wheel. They do not move forward. So consequently, when they're in retrograde, which it is right now, then it's moving forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy. You have to think backwards. When it's retrograde, it's really moving forward. But does it behave like it's retrograde? It does. So you have to kind of flip your mind on it when you're reading it. Okay, something that's tied to the nodes as you study them is karma. Huge. That and Saturn and Pluto. So where those three positions are in your chart, often you can lay out a lot of what's up in that person's life that they're here to evolve through. They're here to grow. They're here to address, change, transform, and get higher up in the wheel, so to speak. And so this theory states, page 12, that the south node represents karma from past lives, while the north node represents dharma of future karma. Another offshoot of this theory is one that states that the north node represents those qualities which you've neglected to develop, while the south node represents what you've developed instead. So if you study this more, basically the north node is where you should be pointing your evolutionary path. It's a marker. It's like a North Star, like come this direction. So you obviously don't know how to do that. So with the north node in Taurus, in retrograde, it's a relearning of trying to understand its place in regards to Taurus themes and its regard to money. So it's perfect because we just had, since 2008, Pluto and Capricorn, 10th house themes. We've talked about this, teaching us about governmental systems and teaching us about structures that have been in place and modes of being and ways of being and how we've done work and how we've done money and how we've done areas in our life where it requires our leadership, 10th house. But it's done, those lessons, with the exception of it moving back this year for those months and then moving forward to relearn that, because that's going to happen. It's basically done. We've come through all those years. So it's like with Taurus going retrograde in the north node of where we're headed, it's like you really have to have your resources and your money and your idea to money in place, balanced and harmonized before I shoot into Aries, which it's fixin' to do. So we're seeing, because again, the USA had Pluto's return, and it was in Taurus's house. And the chart tonight shows the North Node in Taurus in retrograde in the 8th house across from Taurus in the 2nd house. So Taurus is in Scorpio, and the South Node in Scorpio is in Taurus. They're backwards. They're not in the right energy, so to speak. They're in each other's houses. Very, very uncomfortable, but it's a lesson, do you see? It's a mixing up of our finances and the money and our psychological ties to the money. Not only Venus is very personal, it's our magnetism, the way we're seen. Sometimes we can have too much Venus. So where it's really asking us before it goes forward, we need to understand money better and the way that we handled money in the United States and the way that it's impacted us at very, very personal levels. And I know this because it is sitting next to Mercury for one, which is, it's a loose conjunction. It's 7 degrees away, so it's plowed through there once, and now Mercury's going to go retrograde and plow back through it, and then it's going to go forward and plow back through again. And what is Mercury? Mercury in Taurus would be talking about money Mercury's, again, the communicator, talking about money. So you can see these themes tying together. And with the Aries solar eclipse, which I want to go into now, we're going to see how this hits us personally. Aries rules the first house of the zodiac, and Aries is a cardinal fire expression. Aries is ruled by Mars. So we have a lot of power and a lot of movement and a lot of expression in Aries. And this solar eclipse is a total eclipse, meaning that the sun is entirely blocked out by the moon for a while. And it will be as though someone put the light out in the sky. I am reading here from Mountain Astrologer. I love the way that she says this here. This is by Diana McMahon Collis. She says, unlike a lunar eclipse when the sun and moon oppose one another, during a solar eclipse, the sun and moon appear aligned in the same spot. This means there's a jostling of position in Aries alone, showing a concentration of energy. What does it mean when the moon seems to have the upper hand over the sun for a moment in time? It could be that emotional factors rule the day, with normal logic cast to one side, or just literally not visible within our consciousness. Aries is known for immediate and sometimes volatile responses, given rulership by fiery Mars. Decisions made from an emotional stance may be particularly extreme under an eclipse. Normally, we tend not to react from this place, but something may be revealed, thus triggered in an intense response. Whether we view it as good or bad, response may depend on the situation. It's in an Antarctic degree or a critical degree of 29 degrees, this full moon. I mean, that's no joke. That is a potent degree. So I think it's important just to understand, take caution, look wherever your 29 degree is in Aries in your own chart. See where this is going to be highlighted. You can also look at how the moon matches up in a transit to your chart and see where this moon wants to speak to you and where it's occurring. But 29 degrees is very, very strong degree. So I just wanted to bring out the Aries solar eclipse. I think it's important. It's going to be opposite the south node in Scorpio in the 8th house. So it's going to be flipped the way that the chart is tonight. And we're going to have the north node in the 2nd house in Taurus. So it's home. So it's trying to bring, I believe, this Aries moon, getting back to the financial situation in the United States and other world countries, but specifically the United States. This is occurring almost in the 2nd house. It's 29 degrees, 50 minutes. So in another 10 minutes, it's going to be hitting the 2nd house, and the moon moves fast. So it's entering the 2nd house of Taurus, where the United States had its return. It's a solar eclipse opposite the south node in Scorpio in the 8th house. So it's definitely potent. It is squaring Chiron. It is squaring Pluto is squaring the sun and the moon, and it's sextiling Venus, and it's sextiling Saturn is sextiling the sun and moon. So for those who study astrology, you can rewind it and re-listen to that. But those are the main aspects of this moon. It's very potent and a lot of power in this moon to finally move out and make a decision on something. Mars helps you with your energy and helps you make decisions too. So I find that really, really powerful. Now, Mercury is going to go retrograde, like I said, the day after this moon. So the communication after the moon comes out, you might have to revisit some communication right away. So I think it's just best to stay grounded, and just know that these events occur as pointers in the sky, and we can work with the energies and know that truly we are the masters of our fate. We are the ones at the end of the day that hold the wheel. And I believe we have help. I believe we have support from a supernatural experience. But at the end of the day, we're the ones doing it. So just be sober minded and be diligent about it, and watch out for the power of Aries. Okay, well, I'm ready to go into the Kabbalah, part 2. I guess we talked about, did you want me to open with what I had on the background here? We were talking before we got online. Okay. All right, well, I hope that you guys enjoyed the first part of the Kabbalah as much as we did in studying it. And we're going to go now into the actual tree of life. A lot of the people who talk about the tree of life and these center points talk about it being like a lightning bolt, and that it is the above coming below to activate us in our energetic bodies, to shatter the vessel, so to speak, the Shevarat Hakalim, the shattering of the vessels, the exploration of in the flesh on earth as a mystical experience. There's actually a word for this. Can you believe it? I just almost hopped out of my chair when I read that. The Shevarat Hakalim. I guess that's how you say it. Pardon me, my Jewish brothers, if I slaughtered that and you're listening to this. Shattering of the vessels. So the tree of life of the Zephirats speak of two realities: outside God universe and our own inner spirit, that which carries us through our life here on earth. This is the macrocosm and the microcosm, exploring beyond and exploring within, and the understanding that we can see the self and the patterns of the divine within fractal universes. So the theme here is, although we may seem far away from one another, the mystical Kabbalah reveals that there is no separation and that we are one. The mystical Kabbalah, according to Jewish tradition that I read, talks about the 5 levels of the soul and how that's the anatomy of the soul, that it's one soul, but it has many parts. And this lays kind of the foundation for the tree and these points and why we need them. Have you heard of the 5 levels of the soul?
I've heard of it in Egyptian mythology, and it's interesting. In Kabbalah, there used to be 3 levels of the soul and of the tree of the world, and most currently I knew of 4, but apparently it's 5 now. I have not heard of that.
The understanding is that we can only understand what is confined within our universe, and that God is infinite. These are the 2 things that we can know. That God made a space, and between these spaces are the 10 sephiroths. The vessels are what separate us from God. And he mentioned a diagram circle in the center, and that's God. And he shot down a ray of light, and a line started and filled the first Sephirah. Thus, let there be light. The big bang occurred, and everything was formed from the expansion. And the light was too powerful, and the vessel shattered. The 10th could not contain the godliness, so it shattered all the way down into 288 pieces. This is interpreted from the Talmud. And it goes on to say the 288 pieces are further composed of countless sparks of holiness, the Nitzarat. Our spiritual purpose is to repair and rebuild the cosmos, and in essence, rebuild creation and make it whole again. So we do this by unlocking and freeing these sparks, their words, of holiness. So it's this freeing of the sparks that need to be done that they referred to. And the mission here is because these energies split and fractaled out as the energy came down into these spaces that couldn't contain the gloriousness of it. So they split and skewed. It's to rectify the qualities. And when they are rectified, they're reformed as partsufim, or faces and expressions of godliness. And the 10 are reconstituted down to 5 partsufins. 10 is the raw state, and 5 is the rectified state. And he goes into these quickly. One, and I apologize for any poor pronunciation, Ark and Pen, Keter, long face, Abba Shakma, the father. 3, Imma Bana, the mother. Zir and Pen Midat, little face masculine, number 4. And 5, Nukva, Malkut, daughter, the feminine. Strong emphasis on family is placed, where you can change the world if you fix yourself and your family. It speaks of marital harmony, suggesting, or partnership harmony, suggesting that if the home is happy and healthy, it will produce happy and healthy individuals. So, in essence, rectify the home, rectify the world is their motto. It shows the pattern of 5 and its importance, and 5 is the number of rectification, which is never easy. And how true is this when we look at the 5s in the tarot, right? The challenge numbers. I thought that was interesting. The Torah has 5 books, which is known as the books of rectification, corresponding to the 5 parts of them. Starts with 10 zeroths and reduces to 5. There are 10 commandments and then reduced to 5, called the Torah. To go further with the 5 parts of them correspond to the 5 levels of the human soul. The lowest level of our soul is nefesh. It is the basic life force and flows through the blood, and it corresponds to nukva malku, a baby, all instinct, self-centered. The second level is Ruah, is the animating spirit and fills our vital organs. This relates to the bar mitzvah at 20. And the third level is the neshama in the brain, the seat of the mind. We talked about this last week. And animals do not have neshama. And when they reach this neshama, and if they are able to reach this level, they're at the highest level of their development, then they're considered to be rectified. There's a 4th level, an optional. It's called Hiya, is associated with the aura of a person. And then 5th, Yeshira, divine umbilicus, connects us directly to the heavens. Most people will not experience this. And this is where you have these mystical interactions that people have that we know in history that's been recorded. Then he goes into the 5 levels of reality, with the lowest, a physical one, the one we inhabit, called Asiyah, Asaya. Second level is Yetzirah, associated with the realm of spirits and angels. Someone with a refined level would be able to see this. The third level is Bara, the very code of creation above the spirit world that even the angels cannot see. This would be the code that Neo sees in the Matrix. The 4th level is Atzilut, divine emanation, the pure power of God. 5th level is Adam Kadmon, what is known as the primordial man, referring to the initial burst of light at the start of creation. It is the original image of God, a return to our original intention, that being a being of light. So being like God, being holy, because God is holy, our job is to be like kind. Translated, make God's will. Align your will with God, fruits of the Spirit, etc. So the visible universe only accounts for 4% of the actual universe. The other we cannot see. We can detect things and we know they're there, but we cannot see them. And most of our science has been done with 4% of our universe. Thus, what is happening down here is tiny compared to the rest of what is out there. And I thought that comparison was interesting because that is true. We just don't know what's going on out there. But that's their way. They literally break all this down and it goes into great detail, which I just highlighted and cliff noted. But the tree is said to grow upside down and its roots are in heaven. So the tree is said to take place in that lightning flash. As we do see this lightning bolt within the tree, it's much like the lightning bolt that shows up in the tarot. And it's representative of God rousing an individual out of their addictions, out of their problems, out of their poor judgments. And he uses, I would believe, Pluto and Saturn to do it, if I had to guess. So with that, I'm ready to start going into the spheres with you, if you are. That is
That
all
was
I had.
interesting. I really love seeing the evolution of the tree because recently, not just the tree, but of more expanded concepts of Kabbalah. Because recently I was reading 19th century occultists that I mentioned in previous episodes between Papus and Eliphas Levi, and they both mentioned 3 levels of the soul and 3 levels of existence. And Milo Duquette, in his books Alive Today, writes about the 4 levels of existence. And I just appreciate how it keeps getting slightly tweaked over time in ways that make sense. Of course, it's possible to do so in a way that myself or whoever listening may disagree with. But I do appreciate the evolution because it overall it does, most of the tweaks do seem to make sense. And of course it is ultimately up to you to decide, but it's interesting and I admire how it's a heritage passed down by pretty brilliant minds.
Yeah, it was quite like we talked about last week. I agree. I was I could sense the air changing. Like I'm a spiritual person. I believe I am. That's the way I've always lived my life in one way, shape, or another. It's evolved and grown and changed, which I think it should. Uh, it's just a natural part of life, change, right? But I really sensed there was a beauty on it and a yearning in my own soul to rise up to meet these power circles. I like to see them as power vortexes and have balance in them because if you really study these and you study the cards and you spend time with the cards that are associated and the 22 paths, which tie back to the Hebrew alphabet and tie back to the major arcana cards. I think if you make that whole progress and go through that whole wheel, and go through the whole thing, you'll really come out changed. It transformed my life studying these cards. It was deep psychological change that occurred along with other modalities. Reiki I was learning, and I was working with oracle cards as well and doing a lot of cleansing and purging. And they became my friends, they became my guides, and I see nothing wicked in the tarot at all. At all. It's an incredible tool. And it's
Right.
been
Let me
greatly, unfortunately, bastardized, along with this, the Tree of Life and all that. Are we
yeah.
ready to go to the first Zephyrah? The crown.
Well, we did a whole episode in depth of each Sephirah, so I have it grouped in the Trinities, which it touches a little on each, but more Trinity focused. You'll see, and
Right.
as I introduce each Trinity, we'll do the 1 cards, 2 cards, 3 cards.
Oh, hey, I wanted to read this first, if you don't mind, really quick, because it sets
Okay.
it up rather nicely as we start going into these cards. This is
Yeah.
from Alchemy and Kabbalah and the Tarot, the 22 Arcana that reveal the path back to paradise. Samuel on Weor. And I hope I didn't pronounce your name, Samuel, but this is his opening. Now, remember, this is his opinion and his whole background and where he comes from to write a book like this. So, the Kabbalah is the science of numbers. The author of the Tarot was the angel Metatron. He is a lord of the serpent wisdom. The Bible refers to him as the prophet Enoch. The angel Metatron, or Enoch, delivered the Tarot, in which the entirety of divine wisdom is enclosed. The Tarot remains written in stone. He also left us the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. This great master lives in the superior worlds, in the world of Atzilith, which is a world of indescribable happiness. According to the Kabbalah, this world is the region of Kether, a very high Zephyrah. All Kabbalists base themselves on the Tarot, and it is necessary for them to comprehend the Tarot and study it deeply. The universe was made with the laws of numbers, measurements, and weight. Mathematics forms the universe, and the numbers become living entities.
So last week we talked about the letters Yod, He, and Val of the Tetragrammaton, the three Hebrew letters that make up the four-letter name of God, the fourth being a second He. But we're not talking about the quaternary right now. We're going to talk about the Trinity. There are three Trinities in the Kabbalistic tree of life, and each Trinity is Yod, He, and Val on different levels of existence, as well as the Holy Trinity of Christianity, Osiris, Ra, and Horus of Egypt, same as Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu. They're all a combination of a masculine principle, a feminine principle, and an androgynous principle. Yod, just a quick refresher, Yod being the masculine, active, cardinal force, He being the feminine, passive, fixed force, and Val being the androgynous, fluid, mutable force.
Yeah.
So the first trinity, Kether, Chakma, and Binah, 1, 2, and 3 on the tree of life. Kether is the source of all things in this universe, and Kether divided itself to create the universe, starting with Chakma, the divine father, and then Binah, the divine mother. Chakma is the Yod principle, Binah is the He principle, and Kether is the Val principle, although that is a source of some debate. Some people really want the highest source to be masculine, but that's another topic. The Yod principles are all found on the right-hand pillar of the tree, the He principles on the left side, and the Val principles in the middle pillar. Each Sephirah directly across from each other on the diagram of the tree are opposing forces of each other, with the third in the middle being the source of equilibrium. Now let's do the aces, twos, and threes. You there?
Yeah, I'm here. What card do you have? You do have the magician assigned though as the major arcana card there? Just curious.
I didn't get into the major arcana cards because I think if you start to do that, things get really convoluted. And I think that might be the reason they use Roman numerals instead of the regular Arabic numbers, right? Because you have to remember the Sephirah are also, they also represent the numbers, right? The concept, the symbolic concept of the number 1, 2, and 3 goes hand in hand with Kether, Chakma, and Binah. So when we start throwing in the major arcana, right, they also connect paths on the tree. So you have two that they might be connecting, but their Roman numeral might be a third sphere, and I think that just starts to make things kind of fuzzy.
Yeah, this guy who wrote this book lists them, and if I may read this, he says the 10 Zephyrah are, and he lists them, the first 10. And I researched them, and this is pretty much standard. Now, this is coming from his line of thought. And then as you get into past the 10 and you get into the 11th card, that's when it goes into the major arcana as well. But he does assign major arcana cards to the numbers back to. So if we're doing ones or aces, he would tie that back to the magician, because we know that the magician has all 4 elements in front of him on the table. And he's got everything he needs in front of him in the aces. It's the seed, it's the pure raw. It's nothing really. It's just raw power, right? Raw potential.
Yep.
And
yeah,
it's
I like different perspectives. That's the beauty of it. There are many people who want to draw many different patterns in the tree, that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense if you look at it just from, boy, you can have this pure raw potential, but it's nothing if you don't have discernment and wisdom and the understanding of how to use it, and to use it the right way and in the right
That's the first Trinity in
container.
a nutshell.
Exactly. So I can see why why he assigned the magician there, because it's the age-old story, right? You really do have the red slippers on. You just have to click your feet, like in The Wizard of Oz, and you can go home. We have the answers inside of us, but we're not taught to go there.
Right. But also, Mercury, the mage is the card of Mercury. And we know Mercury isn't really Kether. Are we saying that Mercury is the highest source of all? Like, that's what I mean by, like, things get fuzzy when you put too many layers of symbolism on top of each other, especially when you start coming up with your own. It's very difficult for, like, the more items of symbols you have, the more difficult it is for it all to gel together.
Yeah, that's true. But also when you do layer them, you begin to see the correspondingness back and forth, and how it can make sense. But you're absolutely right. It can get, I would say if you're learning it, stick to the numbers, just the numbers themselves and what they represent. But what do you have for 1 and its meaning? The ace.
The way I see the number cards, I don't memorize the meanings of them at all. I read them purely on the symbols. Most of the number cards also have a planet in a zodiac sign, but not the aces. The aces represent Kether, and each wand represents a separate element, of course, of the 4 elements. The Ace of Wands, the Ace of Cups, the Ace of Swords, and the Ace of Discs is Kether in the 4 elements, respectively. For example, the Ace of Wands would be the main 2 themes I think of when I think of Kether are unity and balance. So when I see the Ace of Wands, I see the most balanced version of fire. Ace of Cups, the most balanced version of water, and so on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's in its truest raw form. That's why, right? It's just that pure raw energy of whatever it's in, whether it be mind, body, how it shows up, wands, creation, fire, or if it shows up, yeah. Right.
Because it's Kether, it can't
It's
not
it's a s
be unbalanced because Kether is everything, the source of everything that exists.
right, and this is masculine energy, right? Because one represents the masculine principle of creation. Ones are tied to that.
Well, yeah,
Ones,
that is where I find issue. That's what I personally disagree with. I see that written a lot. People want Kether to be masculine. They really, really, really want it to be. But if we have masculine energy and feminine energy that are things that exist, and Kether is the source of all that exists, then masculine energy and feminine energy most both must have come from Kether. Like, so I don't see how it could be anything but androgynous. But of course, we're in the era of Osiris, era of Horus, where people are very hyper focused on the masculine.
yes. And I think that even if you look at the Kabbalah, mystical Kabbalah and the Talmud and all of that, it's coming from that absolute masculine principle. I think that what's happening is, we sit back and we kind of look at it and question it because we showed up after all these things have been established and we just lived through Pluto going through the 10th house of Capricorn, right? Plowing
Right.
through everything that stands for. And believe me, religion's on the table there too, even though it's in the ninth, so to speak. The 10th is huge. What are we doing with that belief? What are we doing with that higher understanding? Are we using it to good or are we using it to control? Are we using it to dominate? And, the 10th house is interested in that. I would say it's got to dominate where it lives. It leads, it has to survive. It's earth energy. So, ones are the energy that must be acted upon in order for growth to occur. So, it's kind of like having that bike sitting out in the garage, but if you never ride it, you're never going to enjoy it or lose weight or whatever the heck you bought it for. It's just there.
Right.
One is the number of the root chakra. This is important when you're looking at Kundalini energy and you're looking at the serpent rising from the root and doing its 8 circular, I shouldn't say circular, but it's 8 motion of the way that it moves. So the 10, the Wheel of Fortune, is reduced to a 1. I just have to bring this in. It's like, I know maybe some people look at the Wheel of Fortune number 10 like, oh, my luck is changing. But I think it's, are you prepared? Did you do the work you needed to do so that when that opportunity shows up, you can jump on it? Because it reduces to a 1. It's pure opportunity, right? It goes right back to that 1 in the beginning of it just is, and it's not anything yet.
Right. And in most
This,
versions of the Wheel of Fortune, we see a representations of alchemical mercury, sulfur, and salt, which are the same as Yod, He, and Val. There's the Trinity again.
yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I know in the traditional tarot, the weight deck, the hand is extended out, whether it be wands, cups, swords, or pentacles. It's divinely, this hand's coming out of nowhere and is saying, look, here's some energy. Do you want to use it? How do you want to use it? When is it right to use it? This is the 4 suits, right? And the magician
Right.
knows how. Got to go back to 1. Sorry. The magician knows how. He knows what to do with the Wheel of Fortune when it turns. And if he does that, he's going to be the sun, which also reduces to a 1. So, yeah. There's this guy who wrote also on Kether and the Aces being the root. But the roots are the aces. And this is unmanifested, pure spirit, divine before division, pure essence of life, neither masculine or feminine. root of the power of the element. In the aces, we see the hand of God, a huge, oversized hand coming out of the sky, out of the heavens through a cloud, shining in a halo of white. Doing what? Offering a gift. What does the Kabbalah mean? Receiving. So it's the gift, it's the Kabbalah being presented. The aces do the giving and the universe does the receiving. They give us the gifts of pentacles, cups, swords, and wands. So he has that. Keter manifests the great father Hoka. Hakma, which is Shakma, which is twos. That's the way that they break it down.
Yep.
You ready to go on to the twos?
2 of Wands. This Chakma, of course, in the element of fire, and it also has Mars in Aries. Very fiery, very ferocious. It's important to note in the aces, twos, and threes, it's usually considered that there's very little negatives to these cards being so close to the source. What do you have on the 2 of Wands?
Yeah, I have twos, obviously symbolizing duality here. So now we have duality, which is another argument for this being the feminine Chakma, so to speak. Yin and yang, light and dark, masculine and feminine, good and evil, these dualities that we have. 2 signifies reflection, desire, and conflict. 2 represents the moment of creation when 2 forces come together. 2 has to do with union, balance, harmony, feminine principles. All even numbers are feminine, as it is also in the astrology chart. 2 is the number of the sacral chakra, which has to do with change. And 2 is associated with the high priestess, justice, and judgment in the major arcana. So reflection back to Kether and elements in their purest form, that this is the top 3 suprennial triangles, Kether, Shakma, Bana, of the divine, like you mentioned. So 2 is part of that trinity. I have an agreement with that. You would have to look. We're not going to go into each of the cards because that would just take forever, but this is the theme of wisdom. This is I've seen this assigned to Neptune, Shakma, as well as this is the highest of the highest wisdom. It's Venus exalted. And so Neptune is that Pisces high 12th house energy of the last water sign. It's mutable. It's able to go up and bring down. So again, there's different viewpoints on what planets are placed here, depending on who you're studying and where you're coming from. So be interesting to see the other trees of life out there in other cultures that I didn't study, because I only looked at a couple,
That has evolved over time a lot too, the attributions of the planet to the tree. Basically, right now, the planets start at Binah and then continue down 4, 5, 6, 7. In the 19th century, it would start at 4, Chesed. So 4 was Saturn and 5 was Jupiter, and it was all jumbled, not at all making sense to how we have it today. And then there was the discovery of Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, and everyone pretty much likes to put them somewhere different.
Interesting. Yeah. So I think that we find that, though, in a lot of teachings, which is why people say, what is truth? What truth is relative. Truth is whatever you want it to be, and that drives people crazy because they really want to know. They want to see it through a microscope, or they want to touch it, or they want to feel it. Otherwise, they can't validate it. But I think that there's a part of man that is not of this earth that resides within us. In fact, I know it, for me anyway. And it's able to tap into that which is above in spirit form outside of that which is within. So there's that sixth sense, there's that other piece of us that's not rational. It can't be explained. It can't be understood. And that's where some of this stuff lands. And that's why you got to sit with it and study it. Either way, it doesn't hurt to study the planet of Neptune, or the planet of Saturn, or the planet of Mercury, and sit with those archetypes and understand them and the energetic footprints that they have. It can't hurt, right?
I think that's the key to everything, understanding the archetypes. When they say, I'm starting to think that the legend of the secret pronunciation of the four-letter name of God giving you all this knowledge and omnipotence, and I'm starting to think that that might be a veiled metaphor for understanding all the archetypes, because the tetragrammaton gives us most of the archetypes essentially. Yod, He, and Val, which is fixed, cardinal, mutable. You have, and Yod, He, and Val is also fire, water, air, with the second He being earth. So now you have the 4 elements and the 3 modes, which gives you all 12 zodiac signs. So it all kind of stems from Yod, He,
Right.
Val, He, all these archetypes. So I think it's a veiled metaphor, the pronunciation, because we know Yod, He, Val, He spells Jehovah, but I guess there's a different pronunciation that's secretive, I guess, is what they would be implying. But as with most things in this area, I think it might be a veiled metaphor about understanding the archetypes.
Yeah, that absolutely, that would be true. The chakra system also, just to step to the right a minute, is also tied into the tree of life and the 7 chakras, and addressing the human body and the whole person, the physical, astral, mental, egoic, intuitive, causal, and spiritual man. All of this is addressed on the tree, and the cosmic self, and your own consciousness, and spiritual love and spiritual will, and the battles between thoughts and feelings, and the subconscious and the superconscious. Like, it's all there.
So 3 is Binah, the Divine Mother, of course, in all 4 suits. Again, being this close to Kether is considered to have very little downsides, except, of course, the 3 of Swords, sorrow. But even then, that is said to be the same type of sorrow that led the Buddha to his enlightenment, right? Remember, this is the sphere of Saturn. So when considering
Right.
when considering the 3s in all the suits, we should be considering the same themes we've talked about in the goddess episodes about the Divine Mother, Saturn embodiment, Earth, in combination with the suits and planets and zodiac signs that are present on the individual cards.
Yeah, I had a really hard time at first trying to tie Saturn to the mother, because Saturn is tied to Kronos, which is tied to the father, or it could, represent just that harsh masculine energy that
The old man.
can
The
be,
old
it
man
could
is
be
passive.
good or
He's not active.
bad. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah,
talk
I
over
have
you.
here the inner roots of the past. No, that's okay. Are not as patriarchal as the outer forms. And be now ruled by Saturn is like, Saturn represents the great dark sea, And the Great Dark Sea is like a womb. And when I thought about it that way, I was like, oh, yeah. I can see that out of which multiplicity will come. So it's the fulfillment of about to give birth to something once you get here.
Right.
And you have
So
this triune place together.
the concept of form, right there, the top of
Exactly.
Binah and Chakma are the tops of the tree of mercy and the tree of severity. Binah, the left side, the
Right.
tree of severity is the feminine pillar. The right pillar, Chakma sits atop of. It's a pillar of mercy, the masculine pillar. And as we'll get into, the placements of the planets in the spheres on the tree, it, as we just talked about, like seeing Saturn as feminine, you'll see for the rest of the planets, you do have to look at the deeper aspects of these planets to understand why they are where they are on the tree, and as we will get into.
Absolutely. Well, 3 is the synthesis of 2 coming together, becoming more than the sum of their parts. So it's Trinity of body, mind, spirit.
Right.
Heaven, earth, water, past, present, future. Love, vital force, creative success, positive energy. And it's the navel chakra, which corresponds with action and choice and will. 3 is associated with Empress, Hangman, and the world. And 3s, of course, all the 3 show a coming together. And even the 3 of swords, which can be a really tough card, shows those 3 swords going right through that heart. So I did not realize in looking at the tree here that the right side was considered the masculine and the left the feminine, because that doesn't make sense to me. When I think of mercy, I don't think of the masculine. Right on.
It doesn't make sense to me either, but remember, these are coming from masculine worshiping people, this ideology originally. Right? The feminine side is the scarier, darker, more unpleasant side, and the masculine side is where all the nice things are, essentially.
Yes, okay. I see what you're saying. I'm on board.
Right? Because the feminine is the physical.
It's like where the feminine energy crosses. Yeah.
Right? The feminine is physical. Physical
she crosses the
is away
abyss.
from the sky, is away from heaven. The physical is away from God. So the feminine equals darkness. That is their ideology.
Well, and what sits there on that path under the crown going straight down is knowledge, which is Doth.
Right? The hidden sphere.
Understanding comes down to wisdom.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
That's actually another trinity, which I didn't mention here, because the English name for Chakma is wisdom, the English name for Binah is understanding, and the English name for Doth is knowledge. There's a whole trinity right there, right? Wisdom is just knowing E equals MC squared. Everyone heard that before. Everyone has that piece of wisdom. Understanding is knowing E equals energy, M equals mass, C is the speed of light, and understanding algebra and how to manipulate the equation. And knowledge, Doth, is understanding how to take that formula and do something with it in the real world, in the physical world.
Exactly. Which is where we then fall into beauty in the dead center. So, yeah, that's beautiful. There it is. Of course, you have to overcome the energies of 1, 2, and 3. And isn't that interesting? It's where we're born. We begin to move through the chart. We grow with our relationship to this earth and things and money and our communication. And I tell you what, it's all there. It's all there. All right, 4s.
4s. Let me introduce this next trinity. of the next trinity of Chesed, Gabora, and Tippereth. Chesed is a sphere of Jupiter, the benevolent king prone to construction, the Yod principle of this trinity. Gabora is a sphere of Mars, the warrior king prone to destruction, the Hay principle of this trinity. Assigning Mars to the Hay principle on the feminine pillar of the tree doesn't seem to make sense on his face, given the outward masculinity of Mars. Kabbalah, as we just mentioned, goes much deeper from the surface view. We must recall that the principle of form and matter is feminine, and Mars involves the destruction and rearrangement of matter. Jupiter and Mars find their equilibrium in the Sun, assigned to the sphere of Tippereth, the vowel principle of this trinity, considered a direct reflection of Kether, as it is immediately below Kether on the middle pillar. Being a reflection of Kether, it is no surprise the Sun provides the energy to sustain physical life. Now, I think there's a key in its middle pillar androgynousness right there. The energy, masculine, to sustain physical life, which is feminine. That's what I had on the Trinity. Continue into the force, as we just mentioned. 4 is Chesed, the sphere of Jupiter. Think construction, beginning of a project. Because before Jupiter, before Chesed, we had the principle of force and the principle of form. Now we can begin using force to put these forms together. That is for Chesed. So keep these ideas of Chesed and Jupiter in mind when reading your 4 cards.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, 4 signifies stability in the tarot. Rationality, structure, rules, the practical parts of life, self-discipline, rootedness, unmoving, which could be taken in both a positive way or in a more negative manner, like refusing to change. 4 is the number of the heart chakra, which is concerned with balance and love. 4 is associated with the Emperor and death as a major arcana card. And I wanted to read for a minute here on Jupiter. I have this. Jupiter is personal expansion, the process of your realm and horizons. It brings good luck, good fortune. It's known as the great benefic. This is speaking in astrology and other esoteric meanings of Jupiter. It's optimism here and hope, which is why I see it tied to Pisces as well. But Jupiter, something here is, we can be squared with Jupiter or opposite our Jupiter with the personal planets, which tie into those first 3, just beginning and going out in those first initial movements. And this is where we can make things not the way that they should be when we put forth our energy. This is why there's this basic understanding to each level, so that by the time we get here to 4, something should have been manifested that's beautiful. That's the way I see it. Kindness, stability, a strong, positive, stable energy. Mercy. How interesting that it would be called mercy. You wouldn't think that there's power in that, but there is.
That is a very Christian ideal.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it works when sometimes we understand you want to be taken advantage of over and over again. There's a place for severity. There's a place for that.
And in the proper time and place. If you bring out your chakma if you bring out your chesed energy when you really need to be bringing out your Gabora energy, I mean, you end up
Yeah.
turning
Yes.
the other cheek to the burglar in your home.
Right, which is why it's severity, which is why look at the fives. Challenging cards. All right, anyway, back to the fours. I like Jupiter there because that is the great benefic, and you have a lot of power there with Jupiter, a lot of belief, so to speak, and potential.
I do think the more modern tweaks on the tree are very accurate. Like, it's not a case where, oh, the older wisdom is more pure. No, this is something that has been refined over time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and with the fourth chakra too being tied to that's interesting, being tied to mercy and how it encourages us to lead with the heart, lead with mercy.
Right.
Try to walk in your brother's shoes. Try to imagine what that's like. I think that's beautiful. I really do. Something we should all aspire to, especially with all this violence we have had. These people just murdering people. Mars and Cancer, man. Not good. Not good. Can be powerful. Definitely a good position for Mars where it's at right now. But if you have poor aspects to it, it can go into where we're going next, which is 5.
Right, and it's great how we
Which is
naturally started talking about 5 because it is the opposite of everything 4 and Chesed represents. That's why they are exactly opposed to each other on the tree of life, right? They're the yin and the yang to each other. You can
yeah.
understand the darkness more with the idea of light existing. That's what the left right hand relationship is on the tree when you look
Yep.
directly across.
And if you're looking at it, I encourage people to pull a chart up and just take a look at it, and you really can see that. I've got one up in front of me as you're speaking, and it's just a visual that really helps you grab this information and be able to apply it. Now, severity, Geburah is tied to 5s and tied to Mars, yes?
Yes, I think the most when we think about Mars and destruction and Gabora, I think the most balanced, righteous way to see this this destructive force as an aspect of the creator of all things is like destroying a dilapidated building so you can create a new one in its place, right? And creating a new one in
Yeah.
its place is very said, right? These forces work hand in hand. We can't even avoid talking about the opposite in this case. Notice how we keep going back to
Right.
that,
Yeah.
right? Destruction has its time and place. If the building's old and
Yes.
moldy and infested, some things need to be destroyed.
Yep. Yep.
So that's why
Well,
all the 5s
yeah,
are pretty unpleasant, right? It's about destruction,
right.
breaking down. But in the right circumstances, I mean, if you're asking about something you want to be destroyed, that could be the best card, right? There's a time and place for all these energies, no matter how unpleasant they may seem.
Right. Duality. It's important to remember that. And I think that 5s really do represent challenges for further growth. Challenges where we can, like, sometimes you may get grounded for something as a kid and you don't see the relevance of it. But if you allow yourself to, you can see the wisdom behind the decisions because it is a testing time and a limitation. They can be very difficult cards, those 5s. You're judging and assessing yourself deeply here and understanding that there's disequilibrium, I would say, when we get to the 5s, that things are going to get shooken up. You got to break these old habits and you got to go through that fire to be made stronger to get to those 6s. So, kind of learning movement and how to move around is represented by the fives on this planet. And that, of course, ties to the fifth chakra of the throat chakra, which ties us to Mercury when we get to the throat chakra a little bit, because Mercury is speaking and talking and engaging, but it also is represented here in the number 5 because it's just concerned with all forms of communication. Hierophant is associated here, who is the teacher, right? Known as the teacher, and temperance. So that's interesting. But yeah, fives in the tarot are not the easiest cards to get.
Well, if you're asking about how your enemy feels, it could be a great card to get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Time and place.
It depends on your spread, and it depends on where the card sits. That's true. That's true. That's very right. I shouldn't just blanket statement that, should I? Yeah.
I mean, it is generally unpleasant, but some things need to be destroyed, and not just like things within yourself for growth and blah blah blah. Sometimes you hate something that needs to be destroyed. I mean, sometimes it's justified, sometimes it's not. I mean, that's a matter of perception. Just like that's, I was just rambling off topic. Anyway.
No,
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. So sometimes, oh, I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you? I thought you were
No, I
done.
was gonna see if you had more on 5.
I don't, except to say that the times that I've gone through the toughest times, either psychologically, just working through shadow or whatever, I mean, the sweeter the victory on the other side. After the limitation and the testing, it always, the sun always rises in the morning, so to speak. Joy cometh in the morning, so to speak. It doesn't stay dark forever. So there's a lot of hope. And if it's tied to Mars, which I believe it is, think about that. It's all back in your hands of how you're going to use that personal energy. You're going to use it in the right way, because you need to have that understanding and wisdom. You got to have that knowledge of how to apply your severity, how to apply your restriction. So yeah, meditate on those 5s. If you're struggling, you need balance with that in your life, for sure. All right, the 6s. Tippereth.
The sphere of the sun. In Kabbalistic, I don't know what's the right word for it is here. In Kabbalistic philosophy, Tippereth always gets compared and related back to Jesus, the sun slash sun, the healer, right? And this is construction and destruction in equilibrium, building up the things that serve you and destroying the things you don't. That's why he is the healer. The sun is expansive energy, which is masculine, but also you remember it's a direct reflection of Kether in the middle pillar. It provides the energy necessary for physical life, which is feminine. The sun sustains life and also can be too hot and destroy life. It's the equilibrium between the benevolent king and the warrior king.
That's powerful. And if those are balanced, then it'll be a thing of beauty, so to speak, representing that there's a time for mercy and a time for severity. Understanding, like, just going back to this so strongly, because I came out of that whole really, really strong Christian, I still love Jesus, but in a different way than I used to. A different understanding, I should say, a different approach to all of that. Understanding that if you're always turning the other cheek, if someone's like, hey, give me your shirt, and you're like, okay, take my coat as well. These are verses out of the Bible that talk about doing this. If your brother needs something, do this. You end up tipping the scales, and they're not balanced, and your life won't be beautiful. So it's like there's this, if we just manage these key core centers of our life, It seems that, if we follow that path, so to speak, that there will be beauty, there will be splendor, so to speak, where we're going here. There will be victory, right? That's how I'm seeing that.
Oh, right.
And the
Alluding to
sun,
one next
I think,
numbers.
the sun is the most, whenever we see the sun card, it's the most beautiful and idolized form of that suit. So when you look at all the 6 cards in the tarot, they're all the most highest vibration, I would say, in balancing all of those energies so far. Even with the devil card, which reduces to a 6. I don't think the Thoth deck does that, but the weight deck does that, where you get those things in balance. The Lover's card, number 6, you get these things in balance. Your life can be a life of beauty while you're on this earth trying to shatter the vessel and figure it all out, right?
Right. And Tippereth is often called the great equilibrator, or the great transmuter, because it is surrounded by more spheres than any other and has more connections to more spheres than any other.
Well,
Ready?
it also, you
Go on.
reach a pinnacle here when you get to 6, and that you've reached a certain spot, and I think that 6 represent an initial success, and they also can represent a time to pause and to just enjoy this season, so to speak.
It's interesting how people always freak out over the number 6 and 666. I'm like, what do you mean? That's the number of the sun and Jesus.
Did you say 666? Because you cut out.
Yeah. It
It's
wouldn't let me
interesting.
say
6 tripled is
666.
well. 6 tripled is 18. Is 9 is the end of the line, so to speak. 10 is beginning anew, and starting 9 is it. So it's interesting how that
Also the
works.
moon.
6
Also the
yeah,
moon, which would
right,
be the opposite of the sun, which would be Jesus. So that's
right.
interesting. But
That's
all you did
interesting,
was
yeah.
take Jesus's number and times 3, and now you have the opposite. That's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Well, 6 is the number of the third eye chakra too, which is,
Right.
where we connect to all that which is above through that third eye, through our sixth sense, our perception and our intuition.
The final trinity of Netzach, Had, and Yesod. Netzach is the sphere of Venus on the right-hand pillar, where we find our Yod principles. Had is the sphere of Mercury on the left-hand pillar, where we find our He principles. Again, this seems backwards given the apparent femininity of Venus and the apparent masculinity of Mercury. Actually, in past episodes in this podcast, we've talked about both Mercury and Venus being hermaphroditic, but just take this one perception now so you can see the knowledge that it has. However, if we look at the gender of their deeper concepts, it will become clear. The right-hand pillar shows how the concept of energy or force develops as the universe is formed, not becoming physical until the last sphere of Malkuth on the very bottom of the tree. Venus represents relationships, and relationships are fundamentally an exchange of energy, energy being masculine. And being this far down the tree, we are in the astral realm. Thus, Venus represents astral force. The left, and it's interesting because when you're really romantically excited or in lust, what's the thing you feel? You feel the butterflies in your stomach. You feel that energy in your sacral chakra. It's very, very energetic. Continuing.
Yes.
The left-hand pillar is how form develops in the creation of the universe on its way to physical completion. Thus, Had and Mercury represent astral form, also called thought forms, which are animated by the
Right.
astral force of Venus to create egregores on the astral plane, represented as a whole by the moon and the sphere of Yesod, which is attributed to. This is the vowel principle of this trinity, the moon and Yesod. The thought forms are created by our own thinking mind. This Mercury also represents intellect, as most are aware. And its opposing force, Netzach Venus, represents intuition, as intuition is the perception of non-physical energies. When our intellect and intuition are balanced, we can achieve the higher ways of knowing. The psychic powers represented by the moon and Yesod. Psychic abilities do require a certain amount of rationality. It's interesting. We are separating out intuition and psychic abilities because it does require a certain amount of rationality, a certain amount of that hard thinking, right?
Yes.
It's important to realize if you're too emotional or too close to a given subject to see it clearly, to identify wishful thinking masquerading as intuition, to know when to and when not to use your abilities, and other such situations. With all intuition and no intellect, one can be easily misled, confused, resemble a child who does not understand how to properly use a tool, no ability to separate signal from noise.
Hmm. Wow. That's powerful.
And that was all me. That wasn't quoting or anything. I
Yeah.
started writing some of my own.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Well, so we have Venus and Mars, and Venus is our capacity to love and our
Venus
values.
and Mercury.
Venus is our capacity to love and what we value, and what, it's where our attraction is too, where we have a lot of magnetism in Venus.
Right.
Mercury is that
Magnetism is all
concrete
about
and
energy.
conscious mind. Yeah, exactly. And Mercury's the concrete and conscious mind. It's how you
Exactly.
assimilate, like you were talking about. It's, it's one thing to have Venus, one thing to have a pretty face, you know, but
Right.
are you using your Mercury well? Do you have reason and logic? That's the key words there with Mercury, I would say, is, are you using your reason and your logic here with what you
Very much.
love? Yeah, absolutely.
You have to
Sevens
pair it with
represent forces.
passion. Yeah. You have to
Yeah.
pair the intellect toward, you have to focus it on your passion. Otherwise, you end up understanding exactly why the eights in the tarot deck are mostly negative. That's also why they want to throw it towards the feminine side of the tree, because the mind can be so torturous. And also,
Yeah.
the intellect, the rational thinking mind, is the opposite of faith, which these masculine worshipping monotheistic cults place such a heavy emphasis on faith. And intellect is a dark, feminine, chaotic principle to them.
Goes back to the whole principle of Lilith.
Right.
And why are you questioning me?
Exactly.
Why are you questioning me? Don't question me. Do as I say, kind of thing. Victory is 7 in the tarot, represented by the chariot, which that's all, that word victory is tied all into the chariot. And knowing that you need to harness your power by looking within, gain wisdom in the larger meaning of what's going on. I think sevens call for us to go down into our deepest inner resources and overcome challenge. And we can do that if we use our reason and our logic. We have to go over to 8. We have to incorporate 8. I mean, the 7 stands for the crown chakra too. So it's the highest of the high energy, sitting on number 7, all the way down there, almost to the bottom. So once you get here, you're starting to, I think when you balance these two energies together, you're really starting to lay that foundation for your life. You know, you're setting it down, and is it going to be something that you can stand upon? Is it going to be something that's firm? Because 8 in astrology and tarot and numerology is a number of abundance and leadership and influence. The word influence stands out very strong. I think this is why women that they'll get really emotional, they immediately lose their influence. You've heard this?
Oh, wow.
Because she's so
Oh,
emotional.
Interesting idea.
Yeah.
Right, because emotional is the opposite of logic, and all this Western masculine society values is logic. Intuition has been so malaligned, right? The opposite of rational is irrational. When most people hear the word irrational, they mostly think wrong, incorrect. No, irrational is intuition. It's the opposite of rational. Irrational doesn't necessarily mean wrong, incorrect. It just means it's not logical. You can't explain it with words and logic. It's coming from somewhere else. It's coming from receiving the energy.
Yes. And it's interesting because 8 represents strength in the tarot card, excuse me, strength. And if you use your victory and your splendor, your net sets and your had correctly, it will be beauty. Tipperoth will have accomplished its goal, so to speak. And when you look at the sun card, you look at the strength card in the tarot, she's bending down, closing the mouth of the lion. She's taming and balancing those energies so that she's able, it's a woman, it's a feminine woman doing it as if she's taming her emotions. And it is a call for women to balance their emotional centers so that they can be powerful, so that they can survive, so that they can have inner courage and inner strength and take their animalistic desires and put them in reason and logic a little bit, because women tend to run through those intuitive channels, not emotional. I didn't say that. I'm saying it is more of a feminine, all throughout occultic history. It's more of a feminine way to be. So it's interesting that 8 would show up on that left pillar of the masculine, is what I'm saying. Or of the feminine, excuse me. Does that make sense? Or did I lose you?
No, it makes sense. And I love it.
Well, Leo's represented in the strength card too, right? And somebody that's seen as a leader is the king of the woods, is the king of the castle. It's the sun, the ego itself, the lion, the first chakra, the fourth chakra. It's where, is our ego grounded? Is our ego rooted? Is our heart operating from a place of beauty? So taking these cards and always going back to the numbers before, I think is really helpful too. And going back and saying, okay, yeah, this meant that. That if I take this and put this, I see why I need to have control and reason and logic. Because if you don't have reason and logic here and control this stuff, you're not going to get anywhere. Not in this world. Not in this heavy earth world. It takes discipline to be here, to make it, and to survive. So 8s, I think, tie into that mindset really, really strongly, the 8s. Especially the 8 of Swords.
Very much so.
Okay, 9.
9.
Yesod.
God and the moon. I see is representing the psyche as a whole. And we were just talking about Netzach and Yesod, the intellect and the intuition. That's essentially your left brain and your right brain. And it's very important to have these two faculties, your intellect and your intuition, in balance. Of course, when looking at the nines, we should think of the moon.
Yeah, and the moon is the collective unconsciousness. It's the masses. So that makes sense with what you led with perfectly. And the nines is where you can have your moon madness, right? The nines is where you can have excess. The extremes of the suit is found in the nine. And it's on the bottom of the tree. The end of the suit's extremes. So it's a very bottom sitting there as if it's the last key before you get to the kingdom, Malkuth.
I don't know if I would agree with the extremes part. It's on the middle pillar, but it is low, far away from Hether. So perhaps I could see it.
Well, I'm relating that back to the nines in the Tarot.
Right, and which
the nine of swords, the nine of cups, the nine of wands. Yeah, if you look at those cards, nine of pentacles, depending on its expression, whether it's a challenging expression or a positive expression, because the nine of pentacles is the feminine entrepreneur in her garden, so to speak. Very powerful card. And the nine of wands, I do not see as a negative card at all. I used to. But as I've meditated on it, I see the nine of wands and I see that person holding their own in the midst of a lot of fighting for whatever they're going for, right? Which in wands would be creative efforts, imagination, intuitive nature, fire.
Those two themes are a good combination of fire and water. That's a very good analysis.
I've got nine signify completion, often in the material sense. Represent a time for looking back over what was done and feeling secure enough in one's accomplishments that one is able to dedicate resources to others by the time we're at nine. It's like you learned something and now you've got another tool. It's also a time to integrate one's achievements into the complete vision of one's life. It's like if you get a lot of nines, you got to be done with it already. Or it is the end. You can expect. We look at the hermit, right? The nine. The nine itself. The hermit just going away and thinking on things and getting ready to go into 10. Getting ready to go into the kingdom. Getting ready to turn the wheel, so to speak. Getting ready to move onto the next phase. What was the lower trinity? Did you get to that?
I forget the title for it. I don't have it in the notes.
But would it be?
It's Netzach, Had, and Yesod.
And Yesod. Okay. Now I have on here that Yesod stands for foundation. Have you heard of that anywhere?
Yep, the English title.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because the next step is a final step, Malkuth, the physical universe. So it's like Yesod is the springboard. It's also called the reproductive organ of the tree.
It's a form of kingship in itself and completion, a resting place. Possibilities and new beginnings. when you get down to Malkuth. Did you go to Malkuth? I'm sorry. Were we on 10?
No, we can go to 10 right
I
now.
think we're on 10. Yeah.
You just continue.
So yeah, like I just said, yeah, belonging to Earth and completing. It's the soul coming down and being able to, like I opened up with, overcome the earthly challenges as a spirit in flesh.
Ew.
We talked about. Can also be like, what's next? I've often thought of that too. Like, okay, I went through this whole thing. Is that all there is? Like, it reminds me of a dude that wrote Ecclesiastes in the Bible, Solomon. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. He just goes off on a whole tangent and just talks about how it's all just meaningless. And I can have all this stuff and all this wealth and all this gold, but it's all just meaningless. That can be 10 too. Remember, we have duality. It is the kingdom. You have arrived, so to speak. What's that?
That feels like the 10 of Cups to me, because the 10 of Cups is like, it's such a letdown. It's just like the entire suit of Cups leading up to 10. Most of it is very beautiful and expressive and happy. Yet there are some downturns on the way, of course, with any story. But most of it is very happy and beautiful and radiant. And 10 of Cups is just blah. It's just like, great, you're full now. You had what you want, what you got. You're not really feeling that intense attraction anymore, that stimulation that you felt in the beginning. Now it's just blah. You've had your fill and you're full and it's over. And
that could be the reverse position, the shadow, because in reverse you've got this emotional feeling that it's like, because it is Cups after all. Hey, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And you can get really unrealistic when it's lower like that, because you're not seeing things in reality. It's
right.
hard.
When you're emotional,
This world does have duality, and accepting it. Yeah, the reason and logic, right?
Exactly.
This is why women forever get, yeah. That's why a woman who's yelling and screaming, immediately a guy's going to shut you out, or the masculine. I shouldn't say just a guy. However, the masculine shows up in the person is going to have a hard time with that. And this is why women get a bad rap. And the other thing is, you can be too stern and not have any emotion. So again, balance and duality here. The 10 reverse can be family problems too, where you really don't know where you should be in your family. And you can feel isolated when it's reversed. And divorce, trouble, separation, when I see the 10 of Cups reversed in a reading. So you have your kingdom, right? But is it a happy kingdom? Because the 10 of Cups is attributed to Mars in the Tarot.
Mars and Pisces, actually, or if I remember correctly.
This is correct. So, Mars doesn't do very well in Pisces. This is that sexual, strong, visceral, energetic love that you can have too much of.
It's
too
exactly
much of something can make you sick and not well.
It's exactly the picture you just painted of the woman coming from an emotional place, Pisces, and the man being very logical, thinking, oh, you're being emotional, silly woman, you're not using your intuition, and just being an aggressive asshole. And what he's not seeing is that sometimes the emotion is what matters at the end of the day. Sometimes you can logic away and justify and rationalize and explain things all day, and it's not going to change how you or someone else feels about something.
Well, and it's interesting because the world card is a path that comes straight down into 10, also known as the Meadow of Delights. So if you get the world, can you take it with you? No, you can't take anything with you, man. Wherever you're going, nothing. So it's this tightrope walk is what I see. This being able to balance all sides of that tree, being able to walk in duality, and that's challenging. The number 32 comes out here in the Tree of Life, where you have the 10 spheres plus the 22 paths equals what's called the 32 paths of wisdom. That is written about quite a bit out there. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
From the
I know the
Sefer
number
Yetzirah
33
that
is
we
huge
mentioned
too.
last week, that's where actually originally they were undifferentiated. Like, it wasn't declared that there were 10 spheres and 22 paths connecting the spheres. Originally in the Sefer Yetzirah, he just named the 32 paths, and that's another bit of the story of the evolution of the tree. Like we mentioned last week, the tree itself with the 10 spheres and 22 connecting paths didn't come about until the 1800s.
Well, do you see, asking you this too, do you see the Tree of Life more tied to Christian, Judaic, Jewish, Hebrew, that kind of thing, type of culture, than you do to modern day, like Christianity? Or, I mean, like, how do you see, let me put it this way, where do you see the Tree of Life showing up today? Or is
Mainly
it more of just a
occultists.
Christian, like
Mainly occultists.
Kabbalah?
And some, yeah,
Right.
well, a lot of occultists use the Kabbalah, and that's mainly who I see writing about it. And there are some rabbis, of course, but I would think there's far less rabbis than occultists writing about it nowadays, because rabbis, they come from the tradition where you're not really supposed to tell the uninitiated about it. It's only a few who have their own personal philosophy of spreading the wisdom. But if you're studying magic in the modern day, it's impossible not to run into the Kabbalah. And where the Christian Kabbalists come into play is the secret societies, especially in the 19th century, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, the Jesuits. They were all very into Kabbalah and still are.
Right. Yeah, that's why I was asking. I'd like to wrap up here and close us out with something, unless you have anything else to share this evening.
Well, wrap it up.
This is from, again, the book Alchemy and Kabbalah and the Tarot, the 22 Arcana that reveal the path back to paradise, Samuel Weor. He says this, and this is the preface. Beloved and immortal beings, greetings and adorations. Beloved disciples, there are two types of Kabbalists, intellectual Kabbalists and intuitive Kabbalists. The intellectual Kabbalists are black magicians, while the intuitive Kabbalists are white magicians. Many times the sidereal gods answer our questions by showing us a tarot card. Comprehend the answer that is given unto us. The intuitive Kabbalists comprehend what destiny held in reserve to them by just seeing any card of the tarot. Gnostic Kabbalah is the doctrine of practical Christification. We do not theorize here. This is 100% practical work. Many students long for their Christification, but they do not know where to start because they do not know the clue, the secret. Here we give away the clue, the secret, the key to every student. Here is the clue, thirsty lovers of the truth. Now practice. You are not alone. We love you profoundly. Thus, when you tread on the path of the razor's edge, you will be internally assisted by the brothers and sisters of the temple. In this course, we delivered the clue of resurrection. And that literally means to rise again after death. We have torn the veil of the sanctuary. Here you have all the secrets. Here are all the clues of Christification. Here is written the doctrine that the Beloved taught in secret to his humble disciples. The Beloved One will remain with us until the end of times. This is his doctrine. Here you have it. Study it and practice it.
All
So
right.
before I go, anything you want to say on that?
I mean, the first part seemed a bit absurd, like claiming using your intellect to try to understand the universe and Kabbalah is black magic, is evil. I mean, that seems a bit absurd. It seems like he doesn't understand the idea of balance between your intuition and intellect that we were just talking about.
Yeah, and again, the whole Christification, that word came up a couple times, and that's the literal understanding of the tree of life, from what I understand, is being born as a human, just like the incarnation of Christ, and finding your way, which would be, walking the path that Christ walked, so to speak, and going through all the trials and tribulations that he went through, and then dying to yourself to be risen again. And it's really a Christian theme in the tree. You see that strongly, right?
Right. He was very
Is that
heavily
just me?
emphasizing faith, as we were just talking about that whole faith on the right hand side of the tree being very Christian in ideal.
Right. And I think what matters is, as you sit down as an individual, as I sit down, is we come to terms with what that looks like for each of us, in that we honor the 10 Zephyros, because I think they're powerful and they're beautiful. And if you look at the whole deck of the tarot and you work your way through it, you will see a personality wheel, and you will see the human beings in every situation, pretty much in every area of our lives, that you can come across. And just the higher way to approach those situations, and the lower, known as the shadow, the light or the dark. And like we talked about, wisdom is knowing what to do, but understanding is taking that knowledge and applying it in a way that we can then create a life of beauty. So there's so
Very
much
nice.
that can be said on the Kabbalah, so much. And we probably could have done more justice to it, but we're sitting here at a very long podcast. So I'm going to wrap it up and close this out. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope that you have a good night.
Good night.